Janet Soskice, welcome to the Centre of Theological Inquiry, where you're in residence.
Thank you.
As a visiting scholar. You've come from the University of Cambridge, where you're Professor of Philosophical Theology. You've arrived here at a time when you've just brought out a new book, both in the United Kingdom and now here in the United States. And it's receiving great attention. It's the extraordinary story of two 19th century Scottish ladies. Do tell us about the book and why you got intrigued by their story.
Well, I mean, this is a true story, and they're not only Scottish but Presbyterian, so it's very great to be at home in Princeton. But these two ladies, born in the 1840s, twin sisters, were great travellers, and their father, their mother died giving birth to them, and their father encouraged them to learn languages and travel. And when they were both widowed, one had been married to a Cambridge don, and when they were both widowed in 1892, they decided to make a trip they'd longed to go to St. Catherine's at Mount Sinai. And someone told them that there were Syriac manuscripts that hadn't been discovered or looked at there that might be the most ancient in the world. Now, everyone knew about von Tischendorf and the Codex Sinaiticus coming from there, but the twin who'd just been widowed, Agnes, learned Syriac in the 9 months between her husband's death and their going, and she did discover a very important manuscript of the Gospels, the oldest Syriac Gospels that we possess. And then there was much more of their exciting life after that.
This was a monastery in the Sinai Desert,
yes.
that had these ancient manuscripts. How did the monks looking after this monastery react to these two Scottish Presbyterian ladies?
Very well. I mean, part of the story is the great quest for manuscripts that goes on in the 19th century, because it was only really then that ordinary people began to realize that, say, the King James Bible was based on Greek manuscripts that weren't really that old. And so it was a real question, how old could you find manuscripts, physical manuscripts of the Bible? So the monks had had a fair... Tischendorf was sort of one of the first to get there. But they'd had a fair few scholars come by, and the monks were very wary of them because, frankly, scholars stole things. But they liked the twins. The twins spoke modern Greek, which the monks spoke, and they spoke Arabic, which the monks also spoke, and were obviously trusted by the twins, so much so that the monks actually asked them, not the scholars, to do the Arabic and Syriac manuscript catalogues for them.
How old were the manuscripts they found?
Well, the physical manuscript that they found was late 4th century, but it was important at the time because philologists could tell from the nature of the Syriac that the translation it carried probably went to the late 2nd century. And this is pushing back our witness for the four Gospels. The four Gospels is being selected as premier, circulating together very early on.
This book is published in the United States by Knopf. It's called Sisters of Sinai. But you came to this story as a theologian, a philosophical theologian. What drew you to their story in terms of your own research interests as a theologian?
Well, initially the magic of Sinai, because I was working on a project on the names and the naming of God. And in this, central for both the Christian theologians and the rabbis, is the story of Moses at the burning bush. Moses asked God for a name. God says, I am who I am. So I became sort of burning bush obsessed. And about 10 years ago, one of my graduate students said, oh, you're always talking about Sinai, we must go. So she organized a little group of graduate students, and I took my children and we went. And I think when I came back to Cambridge, people probably from the Presbyterian College said, well, of course you've heard of Mrs. Gibson and Mrs. Lewis. And I hadn't, and I became fascinated with their story. I mean, that being said, I had taught a lot about biblical interpretation and authority. I'd lectured on Calvin and on Knox. I am of Scottish descent myself. And there were just all kinds of things that fit into the puzzle that made me think, yes, I'd really like to write this book.
Did you learn something from them about your own passion for these questions as a research scholar?
I did. I also had confirmation. The confirmation of following your nose, of really sticking up for what you believe in, and terrifically of hope, a fusion of truth and hope. I mean, one thing that's striking even to Christians today is this hope that they had. Their life was not always a bed of roses, but they always felt that God had a plan for them. Somehow it would be seen true, and they must just be faithful to it, whatever it might be. And of course they didn't have much of an idea what it might be. That was very, very encouraging.
We are at a centre of theological inquiry. In other words, this is a place for search and discovery. So they were very much in that tradition of search and discovery. You've come here to work on your research project on the name of God. Do tell us about your work while in residence at the centre here.
Yes, well, it is the naming and the unnamability of God. And as I say, it begins with the burning bush. And it's striking how important this is, not just for the Christian theologians, but for the rabbis as well. Because in some sense, God is the Holy One of Israel. How can God be named? Yet, especially if you're Jew, to call upon the name of the Lord is to pray. So how can God be named? And a lot of this discussion of the divine names and whether God is nameable at all, I've discovered it really goes back to the Jewish roots of Christianity. Now, we've been sort of told a story that it comes from the Greek side, that the Jewish part was quickly discarded and we went over to the Greek side, and then names came out and we get these classical names of God. God is one, God is omnipotent, God is omniscient, and that this is a kind of metaphysical defacement of the biblical God. I think the story is much more complicated than that. I think these names, and you notice I'm calling them names, not attributes, come from a deep piety and reverence for God, and are not the names of God who's distant or over and against us. That's what I'm exploring.
You're in residence with fellow scholars at the Centre of Theological Inquiry here. Some are theologians, some are biblical scholars, some are literary scholars. How is your residence here with them informing your work? Have you found conversation partners here for your own research?
Very much so. I mean, I gather we've been chosen to have complementary projects, but it is excellent. And it's something, in my experience, quite unique, because you're all here on leave. You all have nothing to do about your research. And so there's time to talk to people. We all know in our own departments as academics, everyone's too busy to really sit down and cut the fat the way, ideally we would like to. But here we have that opportunity, and for me particularly, the colleagues who are in biblical studies and in patristics have a great deal of overlapping interest, as well as the systematicians, and indeed our literary colleague, because what I'm looking at too is the way texts work, the way narratives work. The Moses story, whatever else it is a profound narrative. And so much of theology is the narrative of salvation. This, by the way, hooks back with the Sisters of Sinai, because one thing I learned writing that book, which was the first time I had actually written a narrative, having pontificated about narratives for years, is how difficult it is and what is involved in writing a narrative. So all these things make it a very rich mix of a place where you can do what I think Agnes and Margaret, my Scottish twins, wanted to do, which is they had a strong commitment to the truth. You couldn't protect the Bible from fact. If you went out there, and this is why they were not only physically brave in their expeditions, but spiritually brave, they wanted to go out there and find the facts. If the facts were that the Bible had been concocted, well, in the 6th century, they wanted to know. They didn't believe for a second it would be, but they were willing to put it on the line. And I think here at the centre, we're trying to be rigorous and scholarly and still in the service of faith.
Janet Soskice, thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome. Thank you.